Out here with the gang.
Gang just potty train. Feel me?
Brennan's just retarded.
Thanksgiving night, 2019. Minneapolis police officers rushed through the front door of a house on James Avenue North, responding to reports of gunshots and screaming. What they find inside will haunt them forever. A 2-year-old little girl, barely able to form complete sentences, points her tiny finger toward the kitchen doorway. There, lying motionless between the kitchen and dining room, is her mother, 27-year-old Raven Gant. The child's father, Randall Watkins, stands at the door holding a loaded handgun. Blood stains the floor where Raven took her final breath. This innocent baby girl has just witnessed the unthinkable, her own father shooting her mother in cold blood. But this wasn't a random act of violence or a burglary gone wrong. This was something far more calculated, far more personal. What drives a man to pull the trigger on the mother of his child? What kind of monster looks into the eyes of his 2-year-old daughter and decides her mother doesn't deserve to live another day? These are the questions that will keep you awake tonight, because Raven Gant's story isn't just another tragic headline. It's a terrifying glimpse into how love can transform into something deadly. Raven wasn't a stranger who crossed
And the man
paths
who pulled the
with
trigger,
a dangerous criminal.
the very person
She
she
wasn't
had
in
once
the wrong
trusted with
place
her
at the
heart.
wrong time.
This
She
is
was
the
trying to do something as simple as picking up clothes for herself and her daughter. Something every parent has done countless times. Yet that ordinary Thursday evening became her last. The man who once promised to love and protect her became the very person who stole her future, her dreams, and her daughter's chance to grow up with a mother. If this story already has you questioning everything you thought you knew about domestic violence, you need to stay until the end, because what you're about to discover will change how you see the warning signs forever. Raven's family had no idea she was living in terror. Her own brother admitted he never knew about the abuse. The signs were there, hidden in plain sight, and understanding them could save someone you love. This isn't just Raven's story. It's a wake-up call for every single one of us. So buckle up, because we're about to expose the deadly truth about how quickly love can turn lethal. Before we delve into the darkness that consumed her final moments, you need to know who Raven Gant truly was. At 27 years old, she wasn't just another statistic or headline. She was a force of nature. Her best friend Jakara Hallman described her as fun, loving, the life of the room, probably the most fashionable in the room. When Raven walked into any space, people noticed. Her smile could light up the darkest corners, and her sense of style was absolutely impeccable. She had this magnetic energy that drew people to her. Whether it was a family gathering, a night out with friends, or just a casual day at work, Raven brought joy wherever she went. She was the kind of person who remembered your birthday, who checked on you when you were down, who celebrated your victories like they were her own. Professionally, Raven was crushing it as an accounts manager at the Union Depot Hotel. Her mother, Lakeisha Gant, proudly called her a super hard worker, the kind of employee who went above and beyond, who took pride in her responsibilities, who had dreams of climbing higher in her career. She wasn't just working a job. She was building a future for herself and her daughter. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to how Raven felt about being a mother. Her 2-year-old daughter JJ was her entire world. Every decision she made, every sacrifice she endured, every dream she chased was centered around giving that little girl the best life possible. Raven would light up when talking about JJ's latest words, her funny little habits, the way she would dance to music or laugh at cartoons. Raven's love for JJ was the kind that moves mountains. She wanted her daughter to know that her mother was awesome and loved her very, very much. Every bedtime story, every morning cuddle, every silly game they played together was Raven pouring her heart into creating beautiful memories. She was determined to be the kind of mother who showed up, who was present, who made her child feel safe and cherished. The bond between them was undeniable. JJ was Raven's mini-me, inheriting not just her mother's beauty, but her spirited personality. Friends and family would watch them together and see pure, unconditional love in action. Raven had found her purpose in motherhood, and she embraced it with every fiber of her being. She was building a legacy of love that should have lasted decades. Here's what makes Raven's story even more heartbreaking. Her family had no idea she was suffering. Her brother, Ronald Gant III, later admitted he was completely unaware of the abuse his sister endured. The woman who brought light to every room, who seemed so strong and confident, was secretly living in fear. She protected her abuser by hiding her pain from the people who loved her most. This is the devastating reality of domestic violence. Victims often become masters of disguise. Raven smiled through black eyes, laughed through broken ribs, and continued being the life of the party while dying inside. Her mother Lakeisha called her the family's backbone and rock, never knowing that her daughter desperately needed someone to be her strength. The vibrant, fashionable, loving woman everyone knew was slowly being destroyed behind closed doors. Randall J. Watkins entered Raven's life like so many abusers do, charming, attentive, and seemingly perfect. For 3 years, he slowly wove himself into every aspect of her world, becoming the father of her precious daughter JJ. But what started as romance quickly transformed into a nightmare that Raven couldn't escape. Though they never lived together full-time, Raven kept belongings at his Minneapolis home on James Avenue North, a decision that would later become a trap. Watkins was a master manipulator who understood exactly how to maintain control. He knew that Raven's love for their daughter made her vulnerable, and he exploited that maternal instinct ruthlessly. What the outside world saw was a couple navigating the challenges of parenthood together. What they didn't see were the bruises hidden under makeup, the fear masked by smiles, and the psychological warfare happening behind closed doors. The abuse escalated gradually, as it always does. What began as verbal arguments and emotional manipulation soon turned physical. Family members and friends would later testify about seeing Raven with black eyes, injuries she would explain away with excuses about accidents or clumsiness. Each bruise told a story of violence that she was too ashamed or too afraid to share. Watkins had a particularly cruel method of maintaining power over Raven. He would withhold her belongings and their daughter's clothes, refusing to return them unless she came to his house in person. This wasn't about laundry or personal items. This was about control. He knew that as a devoted mother, Raven would never let JJ go without her things. So he turned basic necessities into weapons, forcing Raven to enter his territory whenever he decided she needed to be reminded of who held the power in their relationship. The psychological torture was relentless. Watkins understood that the most effective way to control Raven was through their daughter. He would use JJ as leverage, knowing that Raven would endure any amount of abuse to protect her child's relationship with her father. This is the twisted logic that keeps so many victims trapped. They believe they're sacrificing themselves for their children's sake, not realizing that witnessing domestic violence traumatizes children just as much as experiencing it directly. Raven's attempts to create boundaries were met with escalating aggression. When she tried to limit contact, Watkins would find new ways to force interaction. When she tried to establish independence, he would remind her of all the ways he could make her life difficult. The man who should have been her partner became her captor, and their shared child became the chain that bound her to him. Every day became a careful dance around his moods, his demands, his unpredictable rage. By late 2019, Raven had finally found the courage to end the relationship. She and JJ moved in with her father, seeking the safety and support she desperately needed. For 1 month, it seemed like she had finally broken free from Watkins' control. Her family was relieved to have them both safe under their roof, and Raven began to rebuild her sense of security. But Watkins wasn't finished with her. Even after their relationship officially ended, he continued to manipulate the situation by holding their belongings hostage. He knew exactly what he was doing, creating situations that would force Raven to come back to him. The clothes, the personal items, even JJ's toys became tools of manipulation. He would agree to let her collect them, then create drama and conflict when she arrived. This wasn't about property. This was about maintaining power over a woman who dared to leave him. Have you ever wondered why victims don't just leave? The answer might shock you. Drop a comment if you think you know why Raven kept going back. It wasn't weakness or stupidity that kept her connected to Watkins. It was love for her daughter, fear of losing custody, financial dependence, and the psychological manipulation that made her believe she could somehow fix him or protect JJ by staying involved. Abusers like Watkins are experts at creating invisible prisons. They make leaving seem more dangerous than staying, more costly than enduring. Raven thought she had escaped, but Watkins had one final, deadly card to play. Thanksgiving Day, 2019. While most families were settling in after turkey dinners and football games, Raven Gant was preparing for what should have been a simple errand. Randall Watkins had finally agreed to let her collect her belongings and JJ's clothes from his Minneapolis home. The appointment was set for 9:30 in the evening, an oddly late time that should have been a red flag. Raven had been staying with her father since ending the relationship a month earlier, and he was deeply concerned about this meeting. Something felt wrong about the timing, the circumstances, the way Watkins had been dragging out this simple exchange of personal items. Her father's instincts were screaming danger, but Raven needed those clothes. As a devoted mother, she couldn't let JJ go without her things, and Watkins knew exactly how to exploit that maternal love. The stage was set for a confrontation that would end in tragedy, though no one could have predicted just how deadly this Thanksgiving night would become. As the evening approached, Raven's father grew increasingly worried. He had watched his daughter suffer in silence for too long, and now that she was finally free, he wasn't about to let her walk back into danger alone. He tried everything he could think of to convince her not to go, or at least to let him accompany her. But Raven was determined to handle this herself. She wanted to prove she could stand up to Watkins and reclaim her independence. Her father's protective instincts were in overdrive. He knew Watkins' history of violence, had seen the bruises on his daughter's face, and understood that abusers don't simply let their victims walk away peacefully. He begged Raven to wait until morning, to bring someone with her, to meet Watkins in a public place instead. But Watkins had been clear. She had to come to his house, alone, at the time he specified. It was his final power play, and tragically, it worked. At 9:30 that night, Raven arrived at the house on James Avenue North, where she had left pieces of her life behind. What happened next can only be reconstructed from the evidence left behind and the testimony that would later emerge in court. Watkins had lured her inside under the pretense of collecting belongings, but his true intentions were far more deadly. Inside the house, a domestic disturbance erupted. Neighbors would later report hearing shouting, screaming, and the sounds of a violent confrontation. Raven had come for clothes and personal items, but Watkins had other plans. The man who had spent 3 years controlling and manipulating her wasn't ready to let her go. In his twisted mind, if he couldn't have her, then no one could. The argument escalated quickly, fueled by Watkins' rage at losing control over the woman he had terrorized for years. 2-year-old JJ was somewhere in that house, witnessing her parents' final, fatal confrontation. The innocent child had no way of understanding that her world was about to be destroyed forever. Then came the moment that changed everything. In the heat of their confrontation, with their 2-year-old daughter somewhere nearby, Randall Watkins made a decision that would haunt everyone involved forever. He pulled out a gun and shot Raven Gant in the back. Not in the chest, during a face-to-face struggle. Not in self-defense, as she allegedly attacked him. In the back, the coward shot, the execution shot. The shot that proves beyond any doubt that she was trying to get away from him. Little JJ witnessed her father murder her mother. That innocent baby girl saw the woman who sang her lullabies, who kissed her scraped knees, who loved her more than life itself, collapse to the floor in a pool of blood. The trauma of that moment will follow that child for the rest of her life. Watkins didn't just kill Raven that night. He destroyed his own daughter's childhood, her sense of safety, her ability to trust the world around her. The gunshots shattered the Thanksgiving night silence, and neighbors immediately called 911. Police officers raced to the scene, not knowing they were about to encounter one of the most heartbreaking crime scenes of their careers. When they arrived at the house on James Avenue North, they found Randall Watkins standing at the door, still holding the loaded handgun he had used to kill the mother of his child. But the most devastating moment came when they entered the house. 2-year-old JJ, barely able to speak in full sentences, pointed her tiny finger toward the doorway between the kitchen and dining room. There lay her mother, Raven Gant, motionless and bleeding. That innocent child had to guide police officers to her mother's body, a responsibility no child should ever bear. Raven was rushed to North Memorial Health Hospital, but the damage was too severe. Later that night, she was pronounced dead, leaving behind a daughter who would grow up knowing her father killed her mother on Thanksgiving Day, 2019. When Randall Watkins was arrested at the scene, investigators began digging into his background and discovered a shocking truth that would change everything. This wasn't his first time pulling the trigger on another human being. In 1995, 24 years before he killed Raven, Watkins had been convicted of murder in Illinois. He had shot and killed a friend during an argument, proving that violence was his go-to solution when things didn't go his way. This revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom and completely destroyed any sympathy the jury might have had for him. Here was a man with a proven track record of solving disputes with deadly force, now claiming that killing Raven was somehow justified. The pattern was undeniable. When Randall Watkins felt challenged or threatened, he reached for a gun. When his friend disagreed with him in 1995, he shot him dead. When Raven tried to leave him and reclaim her independence in 2019, he shot her dead too. The prosecution had a field day with this information, painting Watkins as a repeat killer who had learned nothing from his previous conviction. But Watkins and his defense team weren't going down without a fight. They crafted a self-defense narrative that was as audacious as it was insulting to Raven's memory. According to Watkins, Raven had attacked him with a knife during their argument over her belongings. He claimed he was forced to shoot her to save his own life, painting himself as the victim in a situation where he was clearly the aggressor. To support this ridiculous claim, his lawyers presented cell phone videos and 911 calls that supposedly showed Raven as the violent one in their relationship. They tried to convince the jury that this 27-year-old woman, who weighed significantly less than Watkins, somehow posed such a deadly threat that murder was his only option. The defense wanted everyone to believe that shooting an unarmed woman in the back was a reasonable response to feeling threatened. But the physical evidence told a completely different story, and the prosecution was ready to expose every lie Watkins had constructed to save himself from a life sentence. The prosecution systematically destroyed Watkins' self-defense claim with cold, hard facts that couldn't be manipulated or explained away. First, the autopsy results were damning. Raven had been shot once in the left side of her back at close range. If she had been attacking him with a knife as he claimed, why was the bullet wound in her back? The evidence clearly showed she was trying to get away from him when he pulled the trigger. Second, Watkins himself had no stab wounds, no defensive injuries, no marks that would indicate he had been fighting for his life against a knife-wielding attacker. His story simply didn't match the physical reality of what happened in that house. The prosecution argued that if Raven had truly been coming at him with a knife, there would be evidence of that struggle on his body. Third, witness testimony from family and friends painted a clear picture of who the real aggressor was in their relationship. Multiple people testified about seeing Raven with black eyes and other injuries caused by Watkins' violence, establishing a pattern of abuse that made his victim narrative completely unbelievable. The jury saw right through Watkins' lies and manipulation. After deliberating on all the evidence, his previous murder conviction, the physical proof that contradicted his story, and the testimony about his history of abusing Raven, they reached a verdict that delivered justice for her and her family. Watkins was found guilty on multiple charges, both intentional and unintentional second-degree murder, as well as unlawful possession of a firearm. The conviction on both murder charges was significant because it showed the jury believed Watkins had deliberately killed Raven, but they also recognized that even if his actions weren't completely premeditated, they were still criminally reckless and inexcusable. There was no scenario in which shooting an unarmed woman in the back could be justified, regardless of what argument had preceded the violence. But the court wasn't finished with Randall Watkins yet. During the sentencing phase, prosecutors highlighted an aggravating factor that made this crime even more heinous than typical domestic violence murders. He had committed this brutal act in front of their innocent 2-year-old daughter. The judge recognized that murdering JJ's mother in front of her was an aggravating factor that demanded the harshest possible punishment. Watkins received a sentence of 480 months, 40 years in prison, which exceeded the standard sentencing guidelines due to the severity and circumstances of his crime. This wasn't just about punishing a killer. It was about acknowledging that he had traumatized his own child in the most horrific way possible. The court understood that JJ would carry the scars of witnessing her mother's murder for the rest of her life, and Watkins deserved to pay the maximum price for inflicting that trauma on an innocent baby. The impact of Raven Gant's murder extended far beyond the house on James Avenue North, creating waves of grief, anger, and determination that would touch countless lives. At the center of this devastation was Lakeisha Gant, Raven's mother, who had lost not just her daughter, but her backbone and rock. The woman who had raised such a vibrant, loving young woman now faced the unimaginable task of processing her grief while ensuring that Raven's story would serve a greater purpose. Lakeisha's pain was raw and overwhelming, but she channeled it into something powerful, a mission to prevent other families from experiencing the same heartbreak. In the days following Raven's death, Lakeisha made a decision that would define her daughter's legacy. She refused to let Raven become just another statistic in domestic violence reports. Instead, she established a support fund in her daughter's memory and began speaking out about the warning signs that everyone had missed. Her determination to turn tragedy into advocacy became a beacon of hope for other families struggling with domestic violence. Lakeisha understood that her daughter's death could either be meaningless or meaningful, and she chose meaning. The Minneapolis community responded with an outpouring of support that demonstrated how deeply Raven's story had affected people who had never even met her. A peace vigil was organized in her honor, drawing hundreds of people who came together to remember a life cut short and to demand action against domestic violence. The vigil wasn't just about mourning. It was about awakening a community to the reality that intimate partner violence was happening in their neighborhoods, affecting their friends, family members, and co-workers. People who had never thought much about domestic abuse suddenly found themselves asking difficult questions about the relationships around them. Perhaps the most heartbreaking revelation came from Raven's own brother, Ronald Gant III, who publicly admitted that he had been completely unaware of the abuse his sister endured. This confession highlighted one of the most insidious aspects of domestic violence: how effectively victims hide their suffering from the people who love them most. Ronald's admission wasn't just personal, it was educational. He showed other family members and friends that their lack of awareness didn't make them failures. It made them human beings dealing with a manipulative abuser who had trained his victim to protect his secrets. The broader Minneapolis community began to grapple with uncomfortable truths about domestic violence in their city. Raven's case sparked conversations in churches, schools, workplaces, and community centers about recognizing the signs of abuse and supporting victims. Local domestic violence organizations reported increased calls to their hotlines and more people seeking information about how to help loved ones in dangerous relationships. The tragedy had awakened a sleeping giant of community awareness and activism. But the ripple effects weren't limited to Minneapolis. Raven's story spread through social media, news coverage, and word of mouth, reaching people across the country who saw themselves or their loved ones in her experience. Her case became a teaching tool for domestic violence educators, a rallying cry for advocates, and a wake-up call for anyone who had ever wondered why victims don't just leave abusive relationships. The young woman who had been the life of every room she entered was now bringing light to the darkest corners of domestic violence, even in death. The community that had failed to protect Raven while she was alive was now determined to honor her memory by protecting others. Her death had shattered a family, but it had also awakened a movement that would continue long after the headlines faded and the court case ended. Raven Gant's tragic death wasn't just a headline. It was a masterclass in recognizing the deadly patterns of domestic violence that too many people miss until it's too late. Her story teaches us 5 critical prevention strategies that could save lives. First, understand that leaving is the most dangerous time for victims. Statistics show that 75% of domestic violence murders happen when the victim is trying to leave or has recently left a relationship. Second, recognize that abusers often use children and belongings as weapons of control, forcing victims to maintain contact even after separation. Third, know that victims often hide abuse from family and friends to protect their abusers, so the absence of visible signs doesn't mean someone is safe. Fourth, understand that previous violence is the strongest predictor of future violence, Watkins' 1995 murder conviction should have been a massive red flag that he was capable of killing again. Fifth, trust your instincts when something feels wrong about someone's relationship, even if they deny there's a problem. The warning signs everyone should know include unexplained injuries, sudden personality changes, isolation from friends and family, a partner who shows up unexpectedly or monitors their activities, and excuses for a partner's controlling or aggressive behavior. If you suspect someone is in an abusive relationship, approach them with compassion, not judgment. Let them know you're concerned and available to help without pressuring them to leave immediately. Offer specific assistance, like helping them create a safety plan, researching local resources, or simply being a consistent, supportive presence in their life. Remember that it often takes multiple attempts before someone successfully leaves an abusive relationship. So don't give up on them if they don't take your advice right away. Raven's story doesn't have to be in vain. Like this video if it opened your eyes. Share it to potentially save someone's life. And subscribe because these are the stories that matter. Her death can become a catalyst for change if we commit to recognizing the warning signs, supporting victims without judgment, and refusing to stay silent when we suspect someone is in danger. What warning sign do you think people miss most? Let me know in the comments below, because your awareness could be the difference between life and death for someone you love.